Hi, and welcome to CSS Animation in the Real World. I'm your instructor, Corey Simmons, and in this lesson we'll learn what constitutes a CSS animation and a few different ways to create CSS animations. First, I'd like to explain that there are two different types of ways that you can create CSS animations. There's the transition technique, where we just transition from one state to another, and then there's the keyframes technique, where we can set as many keyframes as we want. We'll go over both of these techniques in this lesson just to make sure that you have a firm grasp of what they are. So the first thing I want to do is go ahead and set up our project base. So what we're going to do is we're going to use a preprocessor that I like called Stylus to use something called Auto Prefixer with it. It's probably the easiest way to get Auto Prefixer working, and we'll need Auto Prefixer later whenever we get into using keyframe animations, to avoid having to write out like hundreds of different vendor prefixes. So let's go ahead and create a new folder, and we'll just call it Understanding CSS Animations. And we'll pull this into Sublime Text. And now let's create a new file called index.html and just add some HTML boilerplate into it. And what I'm using the emit plugin here, so I can just type exclamation mark, hit tab, and it'll expand out some generic HTML boilerplate. So let's just name this Understanding CSS Animations, and we'll go ahead and add an H1 to it called Hello Stylus. We'll save that, and now let's create a new folder called CSS, and inside of this folder let's create a new file called style.style. Now, Stylus as a preprocessor is really flexible, so if you just want to go ahead and use, like if you're used to using CSS syntax, you can do that. So we can just say, foo, and you can keep using curly braces and say background red, and you can use your semicolons, whatever you want to do. Or if you want to, or if you're familiar with Stylus or Sass's indentation syntax, then we can just get rid of these curly braces, and we can even get rid of the semicolon. We can get rid of the colon itself, but I kind of like it just to keep the property and the value separated. So we'll leave that in there, and we'll actually change this foo to H1 so that we can actually see it working on our H1 over here. So if you don't have Stylus, what we need to do is open up Chrome, go to node.js.org, and click the install button here and just run through the installer. It's really simple. And once you do that, you'll have something called npm on your terminal. So we'll open up terminal, type in npm, which is Node Package Manager, and we'll say install globally Stylus and Auto Prefixer Stylus, and hit enter. Okay, once we have that, we can cd into our desktop folder, and then into our Understanding CSS Animations folder. And once we're in there, we can cd into our CSS folder. And now we can run Stylus, use Auto Prefixer Stylus, and then we just want to watch that style.style file. So what that'll do is it'll compile this Stylus file here into CSS. So now we need to link that CSS file there, since HTML can't read Stylus. We'll say CSS style.css. Save that, open that up in our browser, and you should have a red background on your H1 now. So the first animation I want to show you is animating with transitions. So we can take this hello animations H1, and we can say transition all 400 milliseconds ease, and we can then during the hover state we can change the background to blue. So now whenever we hover over that element, it should transition from red to blue. So let's refresh, hover over it. You can see over the duration of 400 milliseconds it transitions. So that in and of itself is an animation. It's animating from red to blue. Now the syntax for this, if you just go Google MDN CSS animation, or transition. And then we'll open up this second link here. So the first parameter it takes is transition delay. Actually, the first parameter it takes is the transition property, and then time, and timing function, and time. So the first parameter is transition property, which is all. The second parameter is transition duration, which we've set to 400 milliseconds. You can also specify it in seconds. And then the timing function, or the easing type that we want to use, we just used ease. So come back over here, and now let's make this block a little bit smaller. So we'll say display inline block. Actually, I think we can just say width 200 pixels. Save it, refresh. Okay, now. So now let's animate something else with it, so we can see what this all is actually doing. So we can animate either background, or we can animate other things, but we'll just say all. We'll say background blue, margin left, 300 pixels. So now if we save it and refresh and hover over it, it animates the margin left 300 pixels. Cool. So that's transition animation in a nutshell. It's really good for like hover states and various states that you can apply, or if you're just animating from one position to another position, it's great for that. It's not so great whenever you want to animate from, say we wanted this block to animate over there to the right some, and then down, and then left, and then back up. It can't really do that. So what we need to do is use keyframes. So if you're used to using Flash, or if you've used After Effects or anything like that that has like a timeline where you can set different keyframes, it's very similar to that. Basically in CSS, you'd say like 0%. At the 0% timing marker, I want to have this block over there in the top left. At 25%, I want to put it in the top right. At 50%, I want to put it in the bottom right. And at 100 or at 75%, I want to put it in the bottom left. And at 100%, I want to start it back where it was. So let's go ahead and create that animation now. So we'll come down here, and if you notice, I use this ampersand here, which basically, if you're used to using CSS, it just means we're appending whatever this value is to the H1. So we're saying H1 hover, and then all of our properties and rules there. So we can do that again, and we'll come down here and just say keyframes, and this is how you create a keyframe animation. So we'll say slide around is the name of our keyframe animation. So here we'll say 0%. We want the margin left to be 0, and the margin top to be 0. And if you're using just pure CSS, you'd say keyframes, slide around, and then curly braces, 0%, curly braces, 25%, curly braces, and you just keep doing that, and there'll be curly braces everywhere, but since we're using stylus, we can just dodge all those. So say 25%, margin left, and we'll say 50 pixels. And margin top, still 0. At 50%, we want the margin left to be 50 pixels again. And now we want the margin top to be 50 pixels. So right now it'll go from 0% over here in the top left, over 50 pixels, then down 50 pixels. And then if we just left it like this, it would just return back up to the top left, like in a diagonal shape. But let's go ahead and add 75%. We'll say margin left is now 0 to pull the block back over to the left. Margin top is still 50 pixels, so we can keep it down there with, on that bottom line. And now whenever we get to 100%, we want to say margin left is 0, or and the margin top is 0. So now if we save that, refresh, and hover over it, it's still not doing it. It's still doing the original animation. So that's because we have to specify this slide around animation up here. So let's go ahead and get rid of both of these. And we'll say animation. slide around 3 seconds. So now refresh, hover over it. Pretty cool. And where it's an H1, it already has some margin top on it, so we'll go ahead and get rid of that up here. Save, refresh. And now it's working as we'd expect. Now to make this keep going around, we can say infinite. Refresh, hover over it. Pretty cool. So in MDN CSS animation, and then click on syntax, and now we can see the syntax of the animation rule that we've applied here. So the name, the time, timing function, which is like you're easing, time again, the iteration count, the direction. So if we wanted to go in reverse, we could reverse it, or we could say forwards to make it go forward. The fill mode and the play state. So you can get more information on these right up here. Get some examples of them, but usually we'll just use something like this, like slide around for 3 seconds, like the name of it, for how long it is, and if we want it to be infinite or if we don't want it to be infinite. So in this lesson, we learned the basics of CSS animation, 2 different techniques for making CSS animations. And in our next lesson, we'll learn about how to apply the transition technique to buttons. So stay tuned.